we actually just recently connected, and so Dylan is here to talk about some of the stuff that I have been curious about just in general, and I'm excited to talk one to another trans person about their journey and then how that kind of connects to your spiritual path and some of the work that you're doing at Soul Spiral, your YouTube channel, which I've had a chance to see some of your videos, and I just resonate and connect so much with with everything that you're saying, and I think you're doing some amazing work, and you're putting out this great positive energy and creating some really beautiful things, I think. So I'm excited to hear more about that and talk a little bit about your process and your path. So could you maybe just start off by telling me a little bit about your story and your I guess your transition and kind of how it's woven together and brought you to where you are now?
Okay, so I grew up in a small town in North Wales in the UK, and I I always felt there was something a little bit different about me. I've always been quite sensitive anyway, um, and I grew up an only child, and I had a few friends which were very close friends, but I was a bit didn't feel right in groups. I suppose I've always been quite a loner in some ways. And then gradually, as I got older and older, I felt that there was a rift between me and the girls that were around me, and also the males as well. Though I think I didn't quite know where to put myself, and in some ways, I still don't quite know where to put myself. So I tend to just go with how I feel, at any given time, really.
Do you find that is shifting now? Are you more aware of an energetic shifting that's happening for you still?
Yeah. Yeah, I am. It seems like quite an endless process, really, because it ties in so much with transitioning, like the way that I feel in myself, emotionally and spiritually, in that kind of way. I feel it's the same kind of thing. I think it's a never-ending journey, and we're always learning about ourselves.
Hmm.
And I thought that before I transitioned, I thought I'll transition. I'll be seen as male. I'll feel male. I'll go out and I'll be male and do all these male things. And I'm still exactly the same person. I don't know if I expected everything to just change and shift and for me to be a whole other person. Um, Maybe I thought it was going to be a quick fix in some ways.
Hmm.
And if anything, it brought up a lot more for me to look at, I guess.
Well, has that been the most surprising part of your transition for you, or what has been the most surprising?
Yeah, that has been one of the most surprising things. That it's not all been quite clear cut. There hasn't been an end point and then a beginning, like that's the end of that person and this is another person,
Hmm.
because I'm still the same person.
Hmm.
So that surprised me a little bit because maybe I just wanted it to be easier, cleaner than than it was.
Hmm.
Um,
Do you think that
yeah,
other people's perspective of you has changed? I mean, do you think that surprised them, or how?
yeah, I think it's people's perspective of me has changed in a way that they now see me as a quite a brave person, a courageous person. They see me as a more outgoing person now. They tend to feel into a little bit more of my history and my past and how I must be feeling. I think a lot of people admire what I've done,
Hmm.
and from what I can tell from the people I've spoken to, cisgendered people, that they are very, um, yeah, they admire what we've done
Hmm.
because they can see that it's such a difficult thing to have to go through.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting question for me. I have wondered if there is a collective story that trans people are meant to bring to cisgendered people or to the mainstream people who are having to open to these new ideas that maybe they haven't considered before. Do you think that there's one particular sort of overarching story or message that we're meant to bring, or do you think it's more individual, or what are your thoughts there?
I think if there was a really big, all-encompassing message that we're putting across, it's authenticity and to be who it is that you are. And the only way that you can really be happy in life is to express that side of yourself. Because if you're always holding on to that which you really are, then you're not really living. And I think that comes across to a lot of people I've spoken to. A lot of cisgendered people say, wow, you're really just living as who you are. And isn't that a bit scary, or isn't, and they want to ask all these questions. And I think that's great because it's not just for trans people.
Right.
The whole authenticity thing is for everybody.
Right.
So,
I
yeah.
think it's a huge lesson that we're all having to, in our own way, figure out right now. And you said, I think the fear that comes with change, and we're all being pushed to sort of change and open up and become this new, better, more authentic version of who we are. But it's scary. It's really scary. How have you navigated the fear that comes up with change?
Um, just, well, just kind of throw myself into it, I suppose. There have been some things that I've avoided doing in the past, and then I've really gone for something huge, which surprises people because they think, oh, if you're afraid of these little things, like I used to be quite anxious about social situations or just even small things like going out and being around people. And then I transitioned, and it's this huge thing, and everyone's like, well, if you can do that, then you can do anything. And the same with me traveling to Australia last year. Before that, I'd said to my mum, I can't imagine me ever traveling Europe or anywhere, even around the UK, because I feel so anxious. And then I booked a flight to Australia. So
You just dive head first into it
yeah,
and just see
exactly.
what
So
happens.
just kind of throw myself in there, and yeah. So
How do you know when it's the right fear to throw yourself into, and how do you know when it's just resistance or
yeah, it feels like more of a pull. I think it's like a pull towards doing something. There is a push factor as well, I suppose. With transitioning, there was the pull to wanting to be happier, but there was also the push away from feeling so miserable at the time. Yeah,
That's really interesting. I think about that contrast, that it's a catalyst for so many people. I don't know. Sometimes it's an all-out dark night of the soul situation where people are just miserable.
yeah,
Why do you think it's necessary for us to have those moments that are just so miserable that we're repelled in a towards what we want to take
yeah.
action, or do you think that we have it within us to just go ahead and take that step without feeling the discomfort of what we don't want?
Yeah, I think further down the line, as I've gone along, then I've just known what's right and not had to have that really low point before I know what it is. But to begin with, I think we all need the contrast. I think we all need to get to that point where we think, right, okay, so I can't do this anymore. I don't want to be down here anymore. I'm going to have to go for that instead. Anything's got to be better than this.
Right.
So that's how I found it anyway.
And did that begin with your transition? Was that the catalyst for you in terms of that darkness that was pushing you in the direction of
Yeah,
you?
yeah. I think for such a long time, I didn't know what it was. I didn't put a name to it, or I just wasn't quite sure what it was that was keeping me in that dark place. I think for years and years, I drank a lot. I took a lot of drugs. I wanted to block out as much as possible of my life. I didn't want to feel like me. I kept saying I wanted to disappear. I had suicidal thoughts, that kind of thing, and I didn't really know where it was coming from. I knew that I didn't feel completely comfortable with who I was or where I was, but I didn't figure it out until an ex of mine, she she started calling me by a male nickname,
Mm.
and it felt right. Um,
Had it ever occurred to you before that might
um,
be you?
I didn't even know. I mean, I knew about transgender people, but not really. It wasn't really completely in my awareness. It was like something on the outskirts of my awareness, and I knew more about male to female. Um, that was the only way that I knew that it happened, I guess. And so it didn't even cross my mind that I might be trans, that I might need to transition physically to feel better in myself. So when she started calling me by a male nickname and it felt right, I thought, wow, you know, what's this? Like, what do I need to do here, or what do I need to look at? And yeah, she said, you know, you'd probably feel more comfortable as male. She said, I see you as male, and I thought, oh,
Aha.
yeah, exactly, aha moment, and it clicked, and I thought, okay, so what am I going to do about that? Like, I had no idea what that even entailed.
Aha and oh shit.
Yeah, exactly. Both of those things at the same time. Yeah,
Exactly. The fear rushes in at the same time that
yeah,
you're
yeah,
like, oh, now I've got to take action or not. And
yeah,
but that realization sometimes is as scary as it is exhilarating.
yeah, exactly. It was like, wow, I can do something about this. But then it was like, okay, so how do I do something about this?
Right.
Where do I start?
Um, and it's interesting for me, once I started the process, and I don't know what your experience of this was, that was one thing, one way I knew that it was the right path for me because it became so easy at a certain
Yeah,
point. I mean, once I just started taking steps in the direction that I was wanting, that I felt like I was being pulled to go, like doors just started opening, and it was such an easy process for me.
yeah.
I don't know, did you have any indicators after you started the process that you were moving in the right direction, or did you feel that within yourself after you started?
Yeah, I did. It was that excitement again. It was once everything started, you get the momentum. Begin with it is that okay, so where do I start? And then once I started kind of making appointments to see people, to see professionals, I saw my GP, spoke to my parents, that kind of thing, and I realized that it was actually going to be um, not a straightforward process, but it was going to be something that I was going to enjoy doing. There was a lot of anxiety there as well.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I wasn't as focused on synchronicities or kind of things that went right along the path that slotted into place.
Right.
Uh, if I look back now, I could probably find
That
quite a
is
few.
true. I thought about that after I said that. That it's easy for me to look back now and see it as happening that way, but when I was going through it, it didn't necessarily feel that way.
No, it was quite a struggle at times. I
Yeah.
think to just keep, especially with pronouns and the name, I think to keep having to remind people
Right.
and then feeling bad because I was pulling people up on things
Right.
and not wanting to make other people feel uncomfortable. And that's a whole other thing that I'm working through now that I've changed,
That's
where I know that my feelings come first for me.
that's amazing. That's a huge transformation in and of
Yeah.
itself. How have you gotten to that place of because obviously I'm guessing before you did care about how you were influencing other people or
Yeah.
uh, how did you get to this place?
Um, I think I got to this place through taking care of myself a lot more and feeling that I was actually worthy of taking care of myself. I've always been a person that cares for other people and very much put myself by the wayside, kind of didn't really always look after myself as well as I could. Um, so it's just getting to that point of feeling that you're actually worth, you know, having your needs met
Right.
mainly.
So
Uh,
do you feel like now that your connection with your body and I'm guess on all levels you feel more connected and responsible and so
yeah.
how has your self-care changed? I mean,
Um, yeah, I suppose I always use the analogy of when I used to have braces. I had my teeth straightened when I was a teenager, so I went through a lot of pain and a lot of effort to get my teeth the way I wanted them. So now I look after them really well.
that's interesting.
And it's the same with the rest of my body, really, because I've been through so much physically, emotionally, mentally to get to this point that I now take better care of myself. It'd be like going through all of that and the surgeries and the testosterone and everything. And then I don't really want to fill myself full of bad things
Right.
like junk or I don't know. Um, so self care for me kind of looks like eating things that are healthy for me, making sure I get enough rest, making sure I've got space when I need space because I never used to be able to express when I needed my own space to have some quiet time because I'm quite sensitive to noise and things like that. Taking baths and just relaxing when I get really anxious, because yeah, I can get to a point where I'm just like, what's going on?
So you're still experiencing that a lot of the anxiety that you had before, but you're now just you've learned different
Yeah,
tools for responding to that.
yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the main things that anybody can take from any kind of self-help or personal growth, is finding those things that fit with you, because not all things fit the same with different people.
Very true.
So I think kind of shop around a little bit, read different things, and see what you enjoy doing.
That makes a
Yeah.
big difference.
Mhm.
Sorry, I knew I was going to do this, man. Um, I
It's all
had a,
good.
I had
I've
a
got
thought. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I've got notes too.
Oh, good. I know there's probably. I want to give you ample opportunity to touch on stuff that you have on your list that you want to talk about. So for sure, I knew there would be moments where I would forget my notes. But so far, it's funny how you've brought up things that have intersected with questions that I have wanted to ask.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's great. I love that. Um,
yeah,
I do want to talk some because I'm interested in those relationships, the relationship with your body and the relationships that you have with other people now, and how they've changed. Because um, I don't think that I expected to change as much as I have. I mean, I don't know what my expectation was about transition, but it's definitely my expectations. It's far surpassed them because I've
yeah.
changed in ways that I didn't expect to change. Um, so I don't know if you could talk about that. I mean, that kind of ties into the body thing, but I'm also curious about your relationship with others. Um, I, and the way that they also kind of have to transition with us, and I think that's one way that we're kind of helping people learn to change or learn to not fear change, because
Yeah.
um, I think that the ways I've changed have all been good things, but I have definitely been surprised, I think, by the different levels of change that I've experienced. So
Yeah.
could you talk a little bit about your relationship with others as it relates to the changes that you've experienced?
Yeah, I find that my some of my friendships or relationships in my life have I've had to let go of some of them, which I wasn't expecting. I think as I've grown and changed, that we really don't have a lot in common anymore. Um, some people, I've been really fortunate in the way that everybody has got my transition, like they've understood it, and I haven't had anybody not want to speak to me or anything
Amazing.
like that. So I've been really, really blessed when it comes to that. Although there are some people that I've decided that it's not healthy for me to be around.
Mm.
Um, I think as I've grown, because I think it goes hand in hand with transitioning, like getting more confident and generally feeling more positive than I did before,
Mhm.
because I'm not constantly having all of this going round in my head, like not feeling happy right in myself. And um, so I've got more of a positive outlook now. So I think a lot of people that don't have that positive outlook, I find it difficult to be around. My relationship with my mum has actually improved tenfold or more, because I'm much happier now, and she can see that I'm happier. I think when I was first talking to her about transitioning, she was worried that I may come across a lot of problems with other people. She was worried for my safety, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And she's seen that I've handled everything really well. I know that she's proud of the way that I've handled everything. So we've definitely come closer together
Amazing.
since me transitioning, which is maybe not what I expected, because I think when we first start thinking about transitioning, we worry about how it's going to go over with those people that we're closest to, and whether they're going to disown us, or like I just assumed that people wouldn't be happy about it. So
That's so funny. I experienced the same thing. There's so much fear going into it because I'm assuming, or I'm creating this story in my head about what I'm pretty sure is going to happen once I start having these conversations, and I realize that nothing happened the way I assumed that it would. I
yeah,
created a much worse story in my head than the
yeah,
reality of it.
me
Uh,
too. Yeah,
so
yeah,
that it's funny how that happens, and then that story, that fearful thing.
Mm.
we feed it so much we are afraid to take action. And it's funny. I thought that once I moved through that fear, um, I wouldn't that I would learn how to do it, and I wouldn't have to deal with this fear anymore. So, and I think you mentioned earlier that the same thing, that the fear is still there, it still comes up,
Yeah.
and hopefully
Yeah.
we're just learning how to deal with it. What are the
Yeah.
biggest lessons that you think you've learned in your transition experience? What are the big ones that you've taken away?
Um, I've learned something that I've actually gained a lot of more faith in humanity, which is not what I was expecting, because people have just been so open to it and so interested and not in any way against what I've done, or it's um, I've learned so much about myself. I've taken away the fact that I can do anything that I set my mind to. I mean, if I can go from one gender to another, then I can pretty much, you know, do anything really, and it kind of feels like a superpower sometimes.
It's true.
And having that, the viewpoint, of both genders and having been one and then being another, and although I always felt male anyway, although maybe I didn't, maybe I just always felt like me inside.
Hmm.
I'm not even sure whether I always just felt male. Like I just see it as a very balanced thing now. But
Right.
I've,
Oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
I've taken away that I don't have to pick one or the other either.
That's an amazing perspective to have.
Mm.
Um, how, how do you reconcile that female past with who you are now, and how do you talk about it with new people, or do you? I don't know. You may. Are there instances where you're stealth versus places where, and how do you choose between, I guess, navigating that?
That's a really good question because that's something that I'm actually kind of looking at the moment. Is there are places where I am stealth and there are places where I'm not. I'm very much not online. A lot of people know I speak openly about it on Facebook. Obviously, my YouTube videos. There are a lot of people that I'm friends with that I was friends with before my transition. They all know, and I still live in the same area, so but there's groups that I go to, like mental health groups and things like that, that none of those people know, or some of them do. My mum goes to the same place and she's like, I'm really confused because I can't remember who knows and who doesn't. I don't know who to mention it to. I'm like, yeah, I can relate to that. Yeah, so I'm considering just putting it all out there, putting
All the time,
it,
just.
yeah, and just let people know.
And
And
how do you decide when is the appropriate moment to bring it up, and how relevant is it in your day to day life?
it's it's again, I think it's quite an intuitive thing with me. Is I'll feel when it's a good time to mention it or whether it needs to be mentioned. I don't ever feel. I suppose need isn't the right word, but whether it would benefit the relationship, I
Mm,
guess.
that's
Um,
really.
yeah. Uh, for instance, when I was in Australia last year, sometimes I'd be sat chatting to someone, and it'd be someone I'd met very recently, but we'd clicked straight away, so we got on really well. And I'd just feel, yeah, she'd just get it, and I'll just put it out there and talk to her about it, and which I did. And I just said, oh, I used to be female bodied, and blah blah. Carried on talking, and then she was like,
Back up.
yeah, I quite often do that. I'll just kind of drop it in because
That's awesome. Like, no
just
big deal, but
yeah, exactly, just this thing that happened, and like yeah, it's
is that how you perceive it? That it's really no big deal. It's just this blip in terms of who you are as a person. It's just this
yeah,
small thing,
it's a small thing and it's a huge thing at the same time.
right?
It's hard to differentiate between the two sometimes. It's a small thing in the way that I don't think it defines who I am, but it's a huge thing because it's catalyzed this whole transformation in another way for myself. So in terms of my life purpose and what I feel I'm here to do, then it's a massive thing. It really ties into that.
That's
But in
amazing.
terms of it, it's not a big sensational wow thing for me. As in, some people are like, "Oh my God," and I'm like, "No,
No big deal.
it's
Just this
something
thing,
that I had to do." You
right?
know? Yeah.
So, how do you think? How do you see the intersection between your physical transition and your spiritual path? Or I don't know how you define those or label those two things, but how do you see them integrating?
Um, yeah, I think it's really tied in with that inner part of yourself being shone outwards, and transitioning from male to female, female to male, either way, is that you are doing that. You're doing it in a physical sense, in a 3D sense. You are embodying what it is that you feel inside. So for me, it's exactly the same thing as the spiritual kind of evolution and stepping onto our spiritual path. I see it as being the same kind of thing because we're expressing that we feel inside. And you can come across the same kind of issues, of people not quite understanding or not knowing what to say about it, maybe avoiding the conversation, because I think both things cause them to look at themselves sometimes as well.
That's very true, and
Yeah.
that's interesting. Um, I'm guessing that I'm trying to think the best way to rephrase this. The confidence that changes within better prepares us for meeting the perspectives that may not always understand, or I'm trying to think how I want to phrase that question, but do you obviously going through the experience and kind of I'm trying to ask two questions in once. One, were you always on a spiritual path? I mean, or at what
Yeah.
point did you decide to step onto it and move through it? I guess it's the same thing as transition. I
Okay.
mean, I guess there's a defining point, and
Yeah.
then for me, I was influenced on both paths by other people's perspectives that were judging, and so I guess there's two questions. When did you decide to step onto those paths, and how have you uh, moved forward despite those outside
Yeah.
judgments, I guess?
Okay. Um, so the um, stepping onto my spiritual path, I've always been very, very sensitive. As I was saying in the beginning, like as a child, I was very sensitive. I've always been quite in tune with nature, that kind of thing. My parents and yeah, mostly my parents actually have been into different schools of thought, and mum's into Native American teachings, my dad's into Zen Buddhism and parapsychology, and I was kind of brought up with all these different ideas and things around me. So that was really interesting, and I feel that I put a lot of that aside through my teenage years. There was so much going on anyway, and I think that's true for a lot of people. There's hormones everywhere, and little did I know at the time that I wasn't very comfortable with my hormones. I just wasn't happy. I didn't know why though. Um, so I remember there was a definite point where I thought I'm going to have to really take this forward and focus on myself, and that was in 2012. Um, so I think, how old was I then? 28. Yeah. So yeah, I just come out of a long-term relationship. My fiance had split up with me. A friend of mine had actually taken her own life, and that was all in the same week.
Wow.
And everything just crashed down, and I just thought, okay, so I can either go back down to where I used to be years ago, be really depressed and just forget it and try and quit, or I can do something different. And I realised that everything that I've always been into, that I've always been interested in spiritually, were the things that I still wanted to look at and to learn more about. And then I decided to live for me instead of someone else. And that's how that came about. In the midst of a huge breakdown at the time, I was a big, big mess. But as we were saying before about reaching the bottom and then thinking, okay, so I've got to do something different.
Right.
So that was the spiritual path, and that was the decision that I made with that. And with my gender transition, very similar, I suppose, that I reached a point where I couldn't keep pretending to be something other than what I was or who I was for other people. Because I did worry at first. The main thing was that I didn't want to upset my parents.
Right.
And so I was trying to keep everybody happy. And yeah,
Except for
not
you.
really keeping myself happy. Yeah,
Exactly. Everybody else was happy, but you were miserable.
yeah, exactly.
That's so
So
funny
it's
how
a
that.
similar thing again. It's that decision of stepping away from feeling like shit, really.
and
Yeah,
choosing yourself.
yeah.
How have you found? And I guess it is a confidence or for me, for a while, I felt guilty or selfish for choosing myself, and because I guess there was still I felt the value that I was missing out on realizing that I had value.
Yeah.
For a while, even after I had chosen myself to transition, I think it still took me a while and I still struggle with
Mhm.
those outside perspectives. So it's not something that for me that I just did one time and I got it. I mean, it's I feel like I'm still practicing it and still learning to choose myself every day in a way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
At
it's
that point too. Yeah.
okay. Not
Yeah.
alone there. And I think we've talked about it a little bit, but how your ideas about gender have changed. Um, how you think about gender now versus maybe before. And I know you talked about it a little bit that you had this expectation that you were going to be female to male, and it was this very clear cut thing. And I don't know if that ties into it a little bit as or the idea of gender on a spectrum, or what your ideas or thoughts are on that idea.
Okay, so I think now that I don't see it as such a kind of black and white definition for me, gender is, I think because I've been able to move from one to another, that I see it as being quite a fluid thing. Um, I see it's difficult. It's interesting actually because where I live, there's very definite gender roles, I'd say, because it's very traditional, kind of small town, men are men, women are women kind of thing. So that contrast in itself has been interesting for me to be around. Um, uh, I'm trying to think what it was. There was something that I wanted to talk about on this actually.
Was there?
Yeah. Yeah, I think with me, the because I see that we've got both kind of within everybody, the masculine and feminine. For me, gender roles can switch in a way, and especially with myself, I can sometimes feel quite masculine, and I like digging holes, and I like pottering around in the shed and building things and stuff like that. But I also like to do more kind of feminine, creative things, I guess, mostly along the creative line. Um, so it's bringing those two together. But then, I also, yeah, just,
Do you find that you're more comfortable expressing both now, uh,
yeah,
or recognizing that both do reside within you?
yeah, yeah, definitely. Especially doing more manual things, I don't feel, I guess I used to feel like weirdly like an imposter. If I was doing something really masculine, I'd feel like, okay, so this is, I feel like I'm trying too hard to be this. Or if I was doing something that would be perceived to be more feminine, I'd feel like that was a terrible thing. Like I didn't really want to be doing it. Like I don't want to be doing this. This isn't me. I'm supposed to be male, and it's that very set thing that we have the idea there. So that's changed. I allow myself to do what I feel like doing in the moment now.
That's amazing. And I think that comes also with that same confidence of whatever that is, that once you start living more authentically and you start feeling
Yeah,
more comfortable in your body. For me, that's been the case that gender roles have become much more irrelevant because I don't see that there is one way to be a man and there's one way to be a woman. And I'm not even sure that I understand what that means to be a man or to be a woman now.
I'm not sure either.
And it's
It's
funny. I don't know what I thought I was going to be as a man. I think other people had expectations of what it was going to mean for me to transition and become a man. That I was going
yeah,
to immediately become like this hyper masculine
yeah,
version of myself. Um, did you
yeah.
have that? Were you aiming towards that? Or do you feel a certain pressure to perform or to express your masculinity in that way socially?
I guess in some ways I did, yeah. To begin with, I very much went towards wanting to work out and, get big and that kind of thing. So in protein shakes, that kind of stuff. which is possibly something I'd do again, but for completely different reasons, more for a fitness reason this time. Whereas I was really focused towards being as masculine as possible to begin with, looking at the way I was sitting, looking at the way I was moving, walking, talking, everything. And it's funny because since then people have said, "Oh, well, we always thought you were quite masculine anyway." So I didn't really need to do any of that. So yeah, what was the question?
I guess, are you more conscious now of how you're expressing
Mm.
your masculine energy versus your feminine energy, or do you just not care about how it's perceived from by other people?
Yeah, I don't care.
That's good.
I think it's just I do what feels right at the time, and I know one of my exes always used to joke about how camp I can be at times, and she's like, "Oh, you're so feminine sometimes," but she really liked it, and she said, "And then other times you're not at all, like you're really masculine." So I think, well, that's probably where we're all headed. I think it's very healthy to be able to do both and express both. The duality of it all is very keeps everything very separate and probably pigeonholes a lot of people and
Yeah,
keeps us, you know, apart from our actual spiritual identity or emotional identity.
right. The more blended version of those
Yeah,
energies, um, and I do think, you know, personally, I think that that is one of those valuable lessons that we are learning as trans people. Just in that process of kind of moving through that spectrum, it provides such an amazing perspective, not only of the gender roles that we kind of are witnessing around us, and how those are expressed. So I know I want to wrap it up pretty soon because we've been talking for a while, but I want to talk a little bit about the stuff that you're creating and about how your own creativity has changed or your creative expression. You mentioned that
yeah.
now you kind of embrace that a little bit more. How are you more creative now? I mean, do you find that, or do you categorize yourself that way now?
Um, yeah, I think I allow myself to be more creative now. I think I've probably always been quite a creative person. I remember writing a lot of short stories when I was about 6 or 7 and made a short story book. And, I made that in school. And I think I lost that somewhere along the line. I did write poetry right the way through my teens. It was very dark. It was very, very depressing, the shadow was all there. It was all coming
You're
out.
just
That's all I was back then was shadow. I
swimming in
put it
the.
back. Yeah, yeah. Um, so after that, I remember feeling a little bit more positive about things. That's even before I transitioned. I wasn't in such a bad place. I was in a bad place in one way, but not in others. Um, so I wondered if I'd ever be able to write again because I thought, well, everything I used to write about was so dark. I don't know how to write a happy poem. Like I just didn't, how am I going to write? So for a long time, I didn't write, and it was when I started pursuing my spiritual path, my spiritual goals, that I started to write again, and a lot of the lighter stuff started coming through. So that's where Spiral Storm came through. My first book um, is a
And that's a
collection.
book of. Oh, go ahead.
That Yeah, yeah, it was a collection of all the things I was feeling at the time, and a lot of the lighter things coming through. Yeah,
And it's a book of poetry, right?
yeah, yeah,
So is that your preferred medium form of expression right now? Is poetry?
yeah. Mostly, yeah. I find that writing's my gift. I'd say it's one of my gifts, definitely. I enjoy playing music from time to time, but I can sometimes get a bit frustrated with that. Um, I do like to paint, and I'm learning a bit more about painting at the moment. Like, I do express myself quite openly, more openly with painting now, but I'm actually learning some technique at a class at the moment
Oh,
because
okay.
I know that can help me express myself a little bit more. When I know what I'm doing, that'll help.
Yeah, a little
Yeah,
foundational knowledge,
exactly.
and then you can
Yeah.
do your own
Because
thing.
it comes through intuitively, but also, I need to know which brush to use and what's the best canvas or primer or whatever. So,
Yeah, learn the
uh,
rules before and then break them.
yeah. Whereas I used to throw myself into things and then get annoyed that I couldn't do them because I hadn't provided that foundation.
That's interesting.
But so yeah, at the moment, mostly for me, it's writing. I'm actually putting together a self-help book
Oh, that's
for transgender people.
that's great. Where will people be able to find this
Yeah.
your work and this project and
Well, I suppose the main place to go to find out about what I'm about in terms of transitioning and the spiritual aspect of it would be to watch my YouTube videos, which is The Soul Spiral. In terms of the book, it's very much in its early kind of
work in progress?
form. Yeah, yeah. So I'm pulling ideas together. I've written a few visualizations and meditations for trans people to use to visualize how they would like to see themselves in the future so that they can manifest that into their lives.
Great.
So I'm quite excited about that because these are all things that I've learned since I began transitioning. So if I'd have had that to begin with, I think it would have helped me a lot. And also balancing masculine, feminine energies, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. That's a tool I wish I had had for
Yeah.
sure. So that is really great. So your YouTube channel, that's really the main point for people who are wanting to connect with you and your work. And I definitely would recommend subscribing because your videos are great. And I think that one thing I enjoy about them is you dive a little deeper than a lot of the transition related videos that I see.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
And I
really
made those videos to begin with. I started making videos 6 years ago,
wow.
right at the beginning of my transition before I started tea, and I was very nervous, very quiet, didn't really know what to say or do, or I just really wanted to document what I was doing, and I wasn't completely sure why at the time, but I felt that it was a great thing to do, both for me and it turned out to be great for other people. That was my first channel when I first started, which I ended up deleting a few years ago when I wanted a fresh start. But I had around 800 or 900 subscribers back then. So when I started again, I thought, oh, I've got to start from scratch. And I don't have anywhere near that amount of subscribers now. I've
Yet.
actually had two. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I've actually had two channels since then.
Oh wow.
So there's one called No Longer a Curse,
That's right.
which is when
That's
uh, you know, how it's not a curse to be trans, how I used to see it as this terrible thing, but it's actually helped me to grow.
that's amazing.
So that's still out there.
Oh, okay. And is that's more transition specific videos?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and they're quite old videos. And then I moved towards the Soul Spiral, which has tied together the spiritual teachings and also transitioning. So
Great. And I guess that's where I probably connected initially with your work. But it's
yeah,
good to know that your transition stuff is out there. I know that I'm just kind of getting started in the whole YouTube world, but I have been a watcher of other people's videos and a fan of people like you who've shared their stories,
yeah,
and there's so much value in those shared experiences. So
yeah,
I do feel like it's finally time for me to start giving back and putting some my perspective
yeah.
out. Um,
Definitely. And it's helped me so much. I mean, when I first decided I was going to transition, I watched hundreds of videos. It was just one after the other. I was just immersed in the whole thing, and it really helped me, you know, to see other people doing it, and they proved that it was possible.
exactly. It's amazing when you see it outside yourself. You realize within yourself that
Yeah,
you can do the same thing.
it's
So
like I can do that.
it's a,
It's great.
it
Yeah.
is. It's
Yeah.
amazing. And so I just have to acknowledge you for putting yourself out there and sharing
Thank
your
you.
story and because it does take courage and I am really grateful for you and people like you who are putting your story out in the world. So thank
Thank
you for the work that you do and for all of the light that you're sharing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for interviewing me. Thank you for giving me the chance to put things across. And
Absolutely, the first of many, I'm sure, for you. So
yeah,
I know you're going to be creating some great stuff. So thank you very much, and it's been so
thank
great
you.
talking with you, and
Yeah.
and just having the validation of somebody else's experience is great. So thank you.
Yes, that's great. I've really enjoyed it,
Thank you
actually.
so much.
So,
Maybe we
yeah.
can do it again
I was going to
when your
say
book is ready.
we can work together probably quite often, I
I
can
would love
imagine.
that. I
So,
would love to. Uh, I'm kind of thinking I would like to do a series of video interviews, and I think it would be great to talk. I would love to talk to you again because I think that I get a lot when people are talking to me in just single videos, but I think there's also this another dynamic when there's two perspectives kind of reflecting. Um,
yeah, Yeah,
So I appreciate it, and we'll definitely do it again for sure. So,
okay, cool.
well,
Yeah,
have a good evening, and we'll talk again
yeah.
soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye.